The limited partner shares in the potentially outsized returns of a well-planned and executed investment, but is a passive investor with no day-to-day operating requirements, and whose liability is limited to the extent of their share of ownership. The limited partner has the maximum leverage on their most precious asset, their time. Now, they say you're the average of the people you surround yourself with. Are you looking to elevate your network? Connect with individuals that bring your average up? This is more than just a podcast. It's a community to learn, to participate, and to connect. There is no other community out there like this specifically for limited partners. So subscribe to the podcast, and most importantly, join the community at thelimitedpartner.com. Welcome. I'm your host, Jake Wiley. So welcome, partners. This is your host, Jake Wiley. This week, I'm joined by Whitney Elkins-Hutten of passiveinvesting.com. Whitney, thank you so much for joining me and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is going to be a great time.
It is going to be a great time. I'm excited. You've got a really unique background, and it wasn't necessarily the most direct path to get into real estate and investing. So I'd love to hear. Tell me about your background. How did you get to where you are today?
Oh my gosh. How much time do we have? Just kidding. So I started off totally by accident in 2002. I was an accidental landlord and I bought a house with a significant other. And, we probably purchased it all wrong, but I ended up with the house after the relationship fell apart and stuffed it full of roommates and completed the rehab on the property and thought the only way that I could possibly get out from underneath this house was to sell it. And I did. Turned a nice profit in 11 months. And then that's when it hit me that I hadn't been paying the entire time for the mortgage. I'm like, oh my gosh, how many more of these projects can I do?
Right.
And I thought I'd discovered the golden ticket to, getting out of my job, right? That was, I wanted to have my time back. I wanted to play. I had family members that were ill. I also wanted to take care of my family. And I thought, how many more of these projects could I possibly do? And really got trapped in that mindset and never actually figured out how to build passive income. And that took several years before. By this time, my husband and I are married. We did a few projects together. And then it was really a head slap for us when we were like, oh, you've got to rent the property out and have income coming in, right? Like, it's not this glorious, $50,000, $100,000 check coming in, every year or two. It's or however often you're flipping, you really have to build it's boring. It's boring investing. So we started transitioning the equity into long-term buy and hold rentals. A lot of those, we utilized the BRRRR strategy. So we were rehabbing the rental and pulling our equity out. So it allowed us to scale to about 30 rentals. And at that point in time, I'm a mom. We have a young child at home. Both of us are working full time. I'm taking care of 3 family members at a distance in our family, just burning the candle at both ends 5 times in the middle. And I'm like, you know what? We have passive income coming in. Can I just stay home with our daughter a little bit? And my husband was like, yeah, that's awesome. And then he goes, but I want that too. And I'm like, oh, hold on. We had never discussed that. And so I was so excited because I'm like, yes, he's coming to the dark side. He sees the power of real estate. However, quick math in my head, and I was like, man, we get to 80 rentals. This is anything but passive, these long-term rentals. And at that point in time, I'd actually rolled out my retirement investments into self-directed IRA. And I kind of parked that. I was like, I'll deal with that after I get our portfolio built. Right. But I had invested in 2 passive multifamily investments, much like what you do, much like what we do. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll figure out what that really means later. And when we started understanding that we needed to transition to multifamily real estate, we kept comparing this, us buying our own apartment to what we were getting return-wise with these 2 passive investments in my retirement account. I'm like, for the time, we have to re-engineer our whole team, our whole market. We have to figure out how to get different lending. We have to figure out not only how to leverage our capital, but how to get other investor capital. I'm like, why don't we just be passive investors in other people's deals, right? And continue to harvest this equity that we had coming in from our long-term rentals and our rehabs. And that's really what kind of, got us to where we are today. I have dabbled on the passive side on the active side of commercial real estate. Love it. And at the same time, I'm just so passionate about, having freedom of time, freedom of choice, freedom to be with my family, freedom to travel. So that's where we are today.
Well, that's a great story. And I think that a lot of people do get kind of seduced by the idea of real estate, that it's easy and you get these big checks. And, I've lived through that where, yeah, there are times when you get some nice big checks, but it is super lumpy. Yeah. And it's even when you have there's times where there's no money coming in. And then there's times where there's a lot. And then it's like, well, I got to reinvest this money. And then I'm back to, I've got no money coming in. So it's, moving to a passive investment strategy is really kind of the goal, right? I mean, that is what you want. You don't want it to be another job. You want it to be, passive investments.
Well, and it all depends on what your goals are in life, right? Do you want, what do you want? One, do you believe that real estate is a good investment vehicle?
Right.
You and I both believe that, right? You can pay 5 different ways in real estate. You don't do that in the stock market. There's no way. Really, right. Real estate is made over 90% of millionaires and billionaires in this country.
Yep.
And so, I mean, there's a lot of power there. Success leaves clues. 2, do you want to be active or passive? For me, I got a job. I do work. But I love my work. I'm passionate about my work because this is what I get to do. I get to educate people about investors on how to what does it mean to be a passive investor, how to do it safely, and educate them on the investments so they're making good decisions for themselves. They're taking ownership, right? Or you can be the active investor. But you know what? There are people like you, like my partners that I work with, that are just brilliant at this sort of thing, right? And so let them stay in their zone of genius. And I get to take advantage of their knowledge and expertise, their market expertise, their ability to get credit and lending, their ability to access other investor capital to get a hold of an asset that I couldn't access on my own, right? And that's the amazing thing. Jake, you're willing to do the work.
Right. Right.
I'm really willing, to give up a little bit of slice of the pie to have my time freedom back. Return on time and attention is there's nothing, I don't know, call me a little bit jaded, but that's what I'm here to recreate in life. So
yeah, so let's talk about passiveinvesting.com. And you can see the energy coming out of you, which is really exciting, or you can hear it, I guess, for my listeners here. Let's talk about it. What do you do?
Yeah, so I've recently joined the team. I've been in director of investor relations, for several years in the multifamily commercial real estate. And, when you're in that investor relations role, you're handling not only the education piece, but also all the moving parts of investor services and handling the raises. I'm a very competitive person at heart. So I was drawn to that. But, kind of like what we were saying earlier is just what is my true, what do I like doing truly in my heart? And for me, what got me up every single day was actually educating the investor. I could talk to a dried paint on the wall and convince them to invest in a deal. I'm just so passionate about it. So that's what I do at passiveinvesting.com is just, I get to spend my entire time with them, talking to investors and educating them, on the power of, passive real estate so they can build their portfolios. It's really that simple.
Yeah, I think that's the point, right? Is that if you do it right, it is that simple. Because if you want to go and invest in a REIT, it's the public market, you're in the stock market. If you want to invest in, you own your own property, well, then you got to turn around and lease it out. You've got to manage with the tenants. You've got to operate. You've got to do due diligence. You've got to go to the bank. You've got to talk to them on a regular basis. There's a lot to it. Or there's this magic world that most people actually don't know about, where you can invest directly into large multifamily or other real estate assets, and you're not beholden to the stock market. You get a slice of the equity pie. The returns can be phenomenal, yet you don't have to do all of those other things. Because that's what I think really burns people out in this in the real estate game, is that you jump in and it becomes a whole nother job. And that's not what you set out for.
No, I still have, you and I were talking, before the show, we both still have, you less than me, but I still have some of my long-term rentals. And, even just this week, there was a property management issue, and a pretty large one that I have to solve, to the point where I might have to actually interview other property managers. And I'm like, okay, this is my day-to-day operator. I'm the CEO of that business, of those long-term rentals. It's essentially, I have to go replace an employee on a very short notice. Right. But, even earlier this year, I have 5 passive investments that are going through 1031 exchange at the end of this year. I get an email saying, hey, we're going to, do you want to be in a 1031 exchange or not? I'm like, yes, of course. Defer my taxes, please.
Right.
Obviously, it's not as easy as that. You want to make sure you still want to be with the operator in that market, in that deal, in that strategy, right? There's a big part of that decision-making process, but I'm like, yeah, do the 1031 exchange for me. I did 4 earlier this year and it was like hot pokers under the fingernails. It was so stressful. And I'm like, I don't want to ever do a 1031 exchange.
Right.
Again. So.
Yeah, I've got 2 in process right now and trying to marry up all the timelines and finding the properties and getting it going. They are a great tax strategy. But if anybody convinces you that it's an easy process, don't do it right away.
You're watching this on video. I'm giving a thumbs down. No.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It is, especially in today's market, right? The market is so competitive that, we've had personally a lot of discussions about whether it even makes sense to do it. Right. Because if you jump in and you don't find the right deal, but it's hey, I got to put my money to work. I've got to have something identified in 45 days. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of pressure to do something dumb. And luckily, we have found the right investment. But there was, a point in time where I was absolutely not. We're not doing it. We're not doing it. We've got to just be really rational here and say, I'd rather pay the taxes than, make a bad investment in something just so I can defer my taxes. But
oh, absolutely. Yeah, we actually ducked out of 2 of the 1031s and made passive investments that came along just a few weeks later. And I don't know. I've heard it called the lazy man's 1031.
Right.
So we took the capital, invested it in another deal, and then used those losses to offset the gains. So
right. Okay.
Just right now, I couldn't even imagine going through 1031s, me, myself, in my personal business in the holiday season, right? I want to spend my time with my family,
right?
And everything done. And yet there is an operating partner. There are operators out there that have the systems and knowledge in place and are willing to do this for investors. And I get to come along for the ride.
Right.
That just seems like a marriage made in heaven.
So how do we find the good ones? I would say the industry is small, right? And, if you're in it, you start to know a lot of people and you know who the good players are and the bad ones. But if I'm truly a limited partner, right? I'm passive. I don't know a whole lot about it. That's the reason I'm not in the game yet. Mm-hmm. How do I figure out who the right people to work with are?
It's so interesting because a lot of investors, and I get this question often, they want to jump into the how, how do I find an operator? How do I vet a deal? How, and they even skip how do I vet a market? They go to operator deal. And the operator is the business, but there's a step before that you have to understand. And that is, what is your investing goal?
Right.
Okay. We already touched on one. Do you believe real estate is a sound investment for you? If you don't like real estate, this is a mute conversation.
Right.
Do you want to be active or passive? I got into passive investing because I thought I wanted to be active. What better way for me to learn the business by being a passive investor? Because I get to be in the deal, see the whole operations. I can be as involved as I want to sometimes, just asking questions. I don't have any decision-making power.
Right.
Or I can be as passive as I want to and just be like, nope, let me know when the deal's done.
Right.
And there's a sliding continuum in there. So, once we check the box that you want to be passive, then you have to understand, what are you in it for? Are you in it for cash flow or appreciation or some balance of both? Right? Because that determines what type of investment strategy you're going to go into and what kind of risk you're taking in the investment. Once you kind of have those pillars lined up, now it's time to go start talking to operators.
Right.
It's like a funnel, like a sales funnel. If anybody's ever in sales, you've got your broad question, real estate syndication, great. We're narrowing it down with each question that we answer for ourselves, because our time's precious, the operator's time's precious. And so this allows us to talk to those operators that we're really truly probably aligned with from the very beginning. And then we're making decisions on a short list. Otherwise, it will be harder for a limited partner to get started because they're just talking to any and everybody. Once we get on the phone with an operator, just to provide some questions and value right here is, you want to understand, who the operator is, their business plan, their strategy. Are they in mobile home parks or multifamily or self-storage? Do they do single asset investment or do they do funds? right? There's pros and cons of investing in one apartment building or a fund that purchased many apartment buildings. Do they have the track record for doing this? Are they doing this full time? Right? For me, I'm trading my time for dollars, at some point in my life and accumulating. I mean, that's a huge exchange, right? I want it to be with somebody who's doing this full time, who's watching my money and strategizing about this full time, who's taking care of my money as if it's my money, not theirs.
Right.
And making decisions on my behalf. Do they have a background in business or in real estate? And if they have, made several investments, what is the performance of those investments? Have they exited out of any? What were the bumps along the way? Honestly, like if I talk to an operator and they've been in business for 5 years and they've never hit a roadblock, that's a red flag. Something's going on there. And because I guarantee you, guys, we just went through 2020 and 2021, COVID, right. Hello, everybody had a bump. So I want to understand how they work through decision-making processes to pivot with the business plan, given the market environments.
Those are great points too, because you think about what kind of investments can you get into? So let's just talk about real estate. So that's not a one size fits all bucket either. There are varying levels of risk. So you talked about mobile home parks, there's office, there's multifamily. Each one of those are very different and might have a place for you depending on where you are in your risk profile, right? Some of these, office, nobody knows what's happening with office right now. It's been an interesting year. Are people going back? Is the office going to be different? Whereas everybody jumped into multifamily. So the returns, it's different. You might get a higher return on an office deal, but is that the right point in time for you as an investor and getting your mind wrapped around that, right? So you pick real estate and then you have to pick what type of real estate are you looking at? And then, what type of returns are you willing to take?
Mm-hmm. And all this, to pull out the point there is that all of those things cycle differently, right? Mm-hmm. And not real estate is so broad that you can't just say real estate's up or down.
Right.
No, like multifamily, like I thought it was peaked out in 2016. Evidently not yet, but it's high, right? Self-storage and mobile home park are coming up behind it. They're in the expansion phase, right? So all of those things have different cycles within the business. And, perhaps they all have a position in your portfolio at some point in time.
Right. And the operators are probably different, right? I think maybe to your point is, if somebody was like, hey, I do multifamily, I do office, and I do self-storage and mobile homes, you're like, are you really good at any of those?
I've seen some companies where the same operation team tries to pivot and do multiple things.
Yep.
That to me is like a division of, cognitive division.
Right.
Like how can they give attention to all those? But I've seen groups and, kind of partial to the strategy that, passive investing is taking on. They have pulled in 2 partners to manage that have like long-standing backgrounds and track records in the self-storage space.
Right.
So that's how they're able to achieve this, bring on the strategy into the umbrella of passiveinvesting.com. But what they're doing is they're bringing on the expertise and the experience in-house. And that's very intriguing. But to your point, like you're just kind of like, if you have like just the one, same 1 or 2 operators and all of a sudden they're trying to like do like 5 different strategies, you're just like, how are you managing all this?
Right.
Where's your time and attention?
Right. And how much experience do you have with it? Right. Like what happens if, like, I don't know, right? We'll figure it out as we go.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess let's turn a corner here. And what about the industry would you change? What would you make better?
I don't know if so much, changing is the right word that I feel, but, what I would love to see, and I know operators do this, but it's giving back. Like connecting, if you think about it, especially with multifamily, the reason why I love multifamily is that it's so tangible. You're actually touching, 100, 200, 300 tenants on a property and making their lives better by improving the property, right? Improving the community. But how can we also leverage as part of that return and like banking in, some sort of like giving back strategy, like to like a charity or something like that? I think there's plenty of play here in some of these deals to be able to do that. And I think operators are doing that, but like making it known what they're doing and that impact that they're creating. mean, I know for me, like, I give back personally to RIP Medical and, Charity Water. Those are two organizations that I'm super, passionate about. Do I like say that I'm doing that? I don't. I
Right.
probably should. I probably should say that more.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good point too. And I think probably the assets themselves, because if you think about a value add strategy for an apartment. So for those of you out there that are listening, want to know a little bit what I'm talking about. You may take an apartment that's just underperforming for the market that it's in. Maybe it's just dated. It hasn't been updated since the 90s. You can go in there, you update it. Now it's competitive with kind of a higher class of asset. So that's a value add strategy. You can increase the rent, you can boost the return, right? That's the value of the property. But what about making the property better for the environment, environmental, or, is there a possibility to bring in some affordable housing into the mix? And I think the answer is yes. And it doesn't seem like it makes sense, like on the surface, right? Because you're like, well, I'm just maximizing for value here. Like that's what my investors want. But I think in the long run, that's where we're headed. So I think there might be some opportunity there too, but along the same ways of like, how do you give back and make that part of the plan as opposed to just saying, hey, we do this and then we give back. So I love that answer.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen operators work into their business plan where they do like financial education classes, depending on who the tenant base is.
Right.
But yeah, I've seen them do like financial education classes, maybe like, a weekly childcare, just to give parents a break, like community gardens. There's so many different ways that you can enhance the property, and it will add value. Like it comes back to you. Right.
Absolutely.
It comes back to the operator. It comes back to the deal. It comes back to the investor. But like, again, it's all about, improving people's lives in the end.
Well, let's talk about giving back. My next question is, this is a big piece of my show, is that we don't get to where we're going by ourselves. And people have helped you along the way. And certain people have probably made a real impact on your career, your life, your ability to get where you are. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to give a shout out to somebody that has helped you along the way here on the show.
Yeah, I would love to give, oh my gosh, I've got like a long list, but I'll name a couple, really quickly. One, my grandfather, like that first property I bought, he lent me $7,000 to buy the property. I had zero of my own money in it. Like you can get into real estate, like even if it's like just through a single family house, right? Or a house hack or something like that.
Did he get all his money back plus some?
Yeah, actually, well, this is 2002, Wild West of lending, right? Like I paid him back. I took out a second on the property. I was 103% financed. And so after I had that second, I think it took me like 2 weeks to get the second closed. He got his money plus interest. I had 0% into the property. So yeah.
But he was a winner in the deal, right? I think that's the point I'm trying to get to, is that like, yes, he gave you a shot, but it wasn't like, hey, this is a gift to my granddaughter here. Like he actually got his money back some, and he's probably thankful that he did it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I don't know about that. I had later found out he had cashed a certificate deposit that he had been holding since the early 80s. Okay. And it was making like 14% interest. I was like, ooh, I should have probably paid you a lot more. But, but yeah, I mean, like for, to, give a shout out, and there's so many people that have helped me on my journey. I mean, I truly believe real estate is such a partnership. I mean, it's all about relationships. I mean, everybody that I've, worked with on a deal, partnered with on a deal, like I owe them a deep debt of gratitude. One that I'll call out, in particular, is my financial coach that I hired back in 2016, 2017, Chris Miles with Money Ripples. If he had not showed me how to like unlock the rest of my capital and assets and like think outside the box on how money actually really works, I mean, I really shudder to think where I'd be today.
Well, that's awesome. We'll make sure we give Chris a shout out in the show notes too.
Yeah, definitely.
But Whitney, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. And I would love to give something free to the audience if you
Please
guys
do. Please do.
With it. Yeah. So I have a checklist, Passive Investing Made Simple, 7 steps to making your first or next investment. Guys, you can use this anywhere, like to help you, understand what the steps are to get into passive investment, and really helps you fill in those gaps to avoid making some mistakes. And you can find that at passiveinvestingwithwhitney.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We'll put that in the show notes as well.
Awesome. Such a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for your time and, trusting me with your audience. I hope I've provided value.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Limited Partner Podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review. If there's any reason you wouldn't leave us a 5-star review, please email me at jw@jakewiley.com. Your feedback is always appreciated. The show is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the limited partner community. It's a community where limited partners can come together to learn about what best in class looks like and opportunities, and most importantly, a place to connect. There is nothing out there like this. So head over to thelimitedpartner.com and sign up. We'll see you next time.